All right, hello everybody. Thanks for coming to our talk. My name is Tom Sanocki, CEO and founder of Limitless. This is John Collins, creative director at Limitless, and we're going to talk to you about building emotional VR character experiences and doing it fast. Our team has been working on VR for a little while now. We actually did an interactive VR character featuring a talking seagull last year at GDC, and we're going to show you the next stage of what we're doing. We're going to keep this talk reasonably informal, so it's not going to be super fancy, and we'll have a chance for you folks to ask questions at the end, of course. Oscars happened on Sunday, and there were a lot of people there, and that's because people care about people. In our entertainment, we are most drawn to the kind of entertainment that features characters and people, because that's how we kind of build that emotional connection with our entertainment. You look at a film like Inside Out, which is literally about feelings and emotions. Like that's the stuff that resonates with people. We even see this in education. Sesame Street was super popular because it had characters in it, and you were teaching through that relationship you were building with the character. And that character could be a fictitious character, a real character, it could be canned, it can be live. And we see this in video games too as well. What would Halo be without Master Chief? Naughty Dog does a great job of building games around characters and their stories. And this is the kind of experiences we need in virtual reality. The more that you get connected to an experience by being there, by feeling like you're there, the more you want other people around. And multiplayer is one way to do it, but that doesn't scale, and it makes it hard to get too many people around if you're depending on other people to be that. So you want digital characters to come in and use that to tell stories, to drive your experiences, and to do things even beyond entertainment, like education. And the reason this is so important is that emotional connection is ingrained in us really deeply. Like if you look at this picture, you know exactly what's going on. Like you feel the emotion from this picture, and it doesn't matter that it takes place in a different culture, what time period, technology, city versus urban. Like that emotional connection is innate. And the two things that really give you that in VR are character presence, feeling like you're in that world and that character is there with you and next to you, and interactivity. Because if I'm in a place and I can't interact, even in a small way, it doesn't feel real, it feels fake. If I put my hand in a character's face and they don't respond, then that doesn't feel real. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can make whatever choices you want and everything has to be an open-ended narrative. Right now, each of us are having our own little story. Like we've come in and we've sat down and we're listening to a talk, and there are a number of choices that you can make, and all of them are going to be important and significant to you. You may look at you might get a text message from a friend, you might pay attention and listen to something, you might not, which is okay, of course. And but at the end of the day, we're all going to file out and leave. Like none of you, I hope, will come up here and start giving the presentation or shove me off the stage. Like those choices are in theory possible. Like any of you could do it, but you're not going to, because that's not really the narrative that we've set up for ourselves this day. And that same principle can apply to interactivity in VR. When you make something interactive, you don't have to handle every single situation, just the situations that feel natural and comfortable for the story and the narrative, the framing device that you set up around that experience. And that lets you actually tell a story, because you don't have to handle people going off the story. You can keep people on there. And it gives you the chance to really spend your time on the things that matter. And this is why VR is not in 3D TV, just in a different form. We're actually creating a new medium where being in the experience and participating in it is key to that medium itself. So last year we did, as I mentioned briefly, we did Gary the Gull. This is an interactive seagull that we did with an outside director, Mark Walsh, ex-Pixar writer-director. And here we worked on creating a character that would be there in front of you, that would talk to you, and then you could respond. Having simple voice recognition and gesture recognition to control how the narrative works out. And that was released as a PSVR launch title, as well as on Vive and Oculus, and it was an Oculus Touch launch title as well. But after doing that, we realized that there's more work to be done on some fundamentals. The infrastructure of VR needs a lot of work. If you want to build an interactive character, you actually have a lot of work to do just to get a prototype up and running. You have a lot of animation to make, and that's not easy, fast, or cheap. You have to figure out how it looks in VR, and that's not easy on a flat screen, because a good VR looks really bad on a flat screen. So if it looks good on a flat screen, you get into VR, it might look bad, and vice versa. It's hard to make the right judgment calls. And you need things to be much more intuitive. A lot of working in VR is very different than flat screens, so a lot of the tools and processes that work for flat screen or designed around flat screen don't feel right for VR. So that was the next step that we're taking. We're working on, let's build out that technology infrastructure and make it very VR native. So a number of our team worked in film at Pixar, and one of the things that folks would say in film is, if you just told us what movie you wanted, we could make it in a quarter of the time. And we were mostly serious. We're joking a little bit, but we were mostly serious. That iteration, that discovery of what you want, to trying things over and over again, takes a lot more time than we realize. And that's something that VR really needs today. We need to build those things much more quickly. We need to be able to get staging for character-driven experiences quickly. We need to blocking and layout. We need to be able to set timing much more easily. I want to be able to say the character goes from here to here about this fast, not 3.2 seconds. You want to be able to really quickly create animation poses directly in VR without having to go back to other software and going back and forth. You want to cut down that iteration. And you want to do it all inside of VR, because you get, taking the headset on and off is a pain. But even if it wasn't a pain, you just need to experience it in the full 3D immersion to really understand what we're building. So we're going to show you a live demo. John's going to run about and he's going to put together a VR experience in just a few minutes.
No pressure. Something tells me this is going to be slightly different than when I'm doing it in my living room at home for recording demo sakes. All right, do you have my screen, Tom?
So this is streaming from John's headset.
All right, you guys can see it all right? Cool, so welcome to the Limitless creative environment. As Tom said, I've been an animator now for about 14 years, and it's still pretty frustrating to me how time-consuming it is to create even decent quality animation, let alone feature film quality animation. I know this is a game conference, but just to give you guys some perspective, in general, feature film animation, you're expected to do about 5 seconds of finished work with a character per week. So it is super slow and time intensive, which isn't very fun, which is why kind of what we're starting to do with the Limitless creative environment for me as an animator is so much fun. It's very quick and easy to start creating basic layout animations for a character that can establish their choreography around your basic set, which is really important, and to be able to jump back and forth within VR to kind of really get a sense of what a space is feeling like. For me, was probably one of the biggest learning lessons on Reaping Rewards is that we initially built our set to a real-world scale, including all the sets and props. But once we're in the space, it doesn't really feel conducive to directing the audience to the story that we're trying to tell. So right off the bat, we kind of realized that we really wanted a way to quickly be able to get better tracking, at least, kind of reorient our scene and kind of figure out, is there a better way that we can be looking at these compositions? Can we make the room feel more appropriately sized to what we're trying to do? So for me, at least, this is a much more intuitive way to go about that process than having to hop back into even just another a game engine or to go back to a third-party software to pull it off. So real quick, we can just kind of play around with our composition and see if that's getting us a more intimate setting for the particular scene that we want to explore. So to me, it's like, okay, this feels a lot more like what I would expect from a hospital room. There's also a lot less space for me to worry about in terms of where our audience might potentially start looking away from the experience that we're trying to direct them to. So that's kind of one of the things that I enjoy most about the creative environment. Another one of the really strong features is we can pretty much on the fly decide, based on what performance we want to do with our character, what poses are going to fit that particular story idea. So If we want him to be kind of a little bit more mellow in this particular scene, we're not going to go with an aggressive approach in terms of the posing. You know, it's going to be a little bit more paternal, a little bit more fatherly. If we want to get the idea that he's kind of being a gentle shepherd, if you will, to us as he tries to teach us his rather dark profession. So we can kind of just quickly go in and rough in some poses that start to give us that feel. So now that we have those poses, we can go ahead, see them in VR. We can start to apply them as an animation. So if we start setting some static poses on our character and start to see playback, it's going to roughly capture the same timing that we created with our hands in motion. And again, that's one thing I love to geek out over, is that I think the analogy for me is, you know, tilt brush has shown people that you don't really have to know how to draw well to still actually make some pretty compelling artwork in 3D space. It's the same thing with motion, right? Like we can feel what's good timing, and we can naturally get the arcs and path of action that a lot of animators take a lot of time to try and get looking right, and we can do it very quickly and very intuitively. So from there, we can also chain animations together. So this is just a quick animation that we had done in Maya as a full keyframe animation, and that'll get dropped in at whatever duration the animation was originally animated at. So obviously we could integrate this with any motion builder, with keyframe animation for Maya, whatever we want to do, and we can then start augmenting it with poses that we've created within the system. If I hop into first-person view, we can also set delays on our bubbles to make sure that we want that pose to hold long enough before it does progress to another pose. You can kind of see that the bubbles start stacking vertically, so we get a sense of our hold length, then what's going to progress next. Technically, we could keep going with a number of bubbles until I guess I couldn't reach them anymore, but just gives you a very basic idea. Oops, sorry. Of how we can kind of quickly, sequentially chain together some animations. I'd have to go and create a bunch more poses. And then if we want to then, to continue on this animation and append it, if we think, okay, well, what if we see what it's like to put our viewer over here? We can kind of create very basic compositions by saying, okay, we're going to enforce that our audience starts the experience here. Compositional expiration is another thing that I found was a lot easier to do when we're actually in VR. And I apologize, I really think I had my back to you guys this entire time, so. But you guys are looking at the screen, so it's all good. So yeah, like we fundamentally found that in user testing, it was interesting that sometimes we kind of took more traditional film style approach, which was we assumed that this was a stronger composition because we have a character that we are being asked to interact with, and we have our main protagonist who's encouraging us to do so. So compositionally, this makes sense. But what's actually interesting is that decreased the sense of urgency and the relationship between our users and the character as a teacher/student in either a questioning capacity, as in a lot of times we found if we actually positioned our Reaper to finish his animation over here, that people would actually actively engage. Let's get him out of the floor at least. People would engage more with the character if they couldn't actually see him in frame. So we got a lot of like, what am I don't want to do this. Why are you making me do this? So that kind of went against some of the preconceived notions we had in terms of what are good layouts. Then obviously the system can scale to encompass different characters. So Tom mentioned Gary the Gull, and we have some of our Gary the Gull assets just to kind of be able to show and play around with. And here's, again, just some more of the keyframe animation that we had done back on Gary the Gull. And you kind of get like a little visual preview of what the animation actually does. You can kind of drop it on your character and see it apply. We can also pose him, but he's not very cooperative when it comes to posing. And then there are just some other little nice bells and whistles in terms of eventually we can scale to incorporate a lot more real-time lighting effects. So if we want to play with different feels for our characters, we can do so. In terms of existing animation that I've done here, once you create it, it's still completely editable. So you can grab your, let's get him out of the way for now. You can kind of grab your path and decide to change the path of action itself, as well as affect timing changes. then if we want to continue this animation, it would be easier if I get rid of this guy though. All right, so assuming we have our character stop here, that's not all we can do. We can obviously extend the animation if we'd like to continue the story that we're trying to tell. So I find it's a lot easier to actually get nice shapes to your path of action in a first-person view. So here's where it can get really interesting when you start to realize that what Tom mentioned in terms of character presence is magnified.
Oh, demo fail.
When we crash.
Welcome to live demos.
But hopefully that gives you guys a little bit of an idea of some of the capabilities.
So we're going to spend the second half of the talk just kind of going through that in a little more detail, because live demos are cool, but you know, we'll just go through it again just to kind of go into a little more detail and kind of explore through it, and then talk about how we're using that in actual production work. So then here's a couple of topics we're going to cover for the next thing. The first thing is obvious UX. So one thing that we're using here is using a style of UX that's really obvious. We are not using menus, we're not using dialogues, we are not putting anything that feels like a flat screen conveyance, like affordance, because it doesn't, to us, it doesn't make sense. It feels wrong in VR, it feels forced. Things that feel good in the real world tend to work well. Things that look good on computers, computer screens, to us don't work so well. So we use a lot of skeuomorphism to really make those connections with real-world objects. You noticed that John, had an eraser in his hand, and when you see an eraser in your hand, you know exactly what that does. So that makes it really simple to teach and to train. We also try to minimize the amount of text in the world. There's only so much you can do. Sometimes you need text, but text is hard to read in VR now anyway. And if we can get around it using voice or using icons or using just another way to express it, that is a lot easier and it's a lot more intuitive. We embed a lot of UI as well. You notice John had buttons on his arms, because we find that it's a lot easier to put the UI into the real world, into the VR world technically, and let you manipulate that than to pop things over it. Again, it's about being connecting to skeuomorphism. It's connecting to making things feel very natural. And then interactive tutorials and an in-VR help system is also crucial for this. You got to stay in your headset as long as you can. Jumping out to watch a YouTube video on how to do it is actually not that great. And watching a YouTube video inside of VR is better, but that's not really the right answer. We want to avoid putting flat screens up. Let's take advantage of the medium as its own medium in order to teach you, train you, help you. And then I'll have John can go and talk through more about these individual things. Some of them will be pretty obvious, and some of them may not be.
Yeah, so this is just a kind of just a little bit more in terms of kind of showing how quickly and easily you can create these paths. I think an important thing to state here is that we're not trying to replace aspects of existing production workflows. We're just trying to augment them with an early system of prototyping. It's only going to get us some really very rough ideas in terms of choreography around the space, but it'll allow us to do a lot more iteration a lot more quickly. Then we're obviously going to go to Maya and actually start building proper layout, but we know we're going to hit our cues in the environment. And for me as a character animator more focused on performance, VR magnifies those minute differences, such as, let's talk about comfortable distance of talking to somebody, right? We all have talked with close talkers. It's kind of awkward. And that threshold is only, it's 4 to 8 inches depending on your comfort level. So that gets magnified when we're actually interacting with characters in VR. It used to be we were limited by the frame, and now we're not. Now they can invade our personal space, and it really does have a kind of an emotional impact on you when you're interacting with these characters. To actually have the Reaper come at you quickly and rise up above you. The first time I actually saw that animation play out, I hadn't prototyped it in VR. I'd brought it into the engine and then played it. I fell over in my living room, actually. So this just gives you a better idea of kind of the variety that you can get to very, very quickly. And to me, that's the strength of the character pass, is just trying to find those compositions while in first person and then figuring out the choreography of your character around space in a very rough form so that you can then go into your primary pipeline and start creating more fleshed out performance animation to get to that next level. But you're not going to waste that time because you already know that you're getting what you want out of that particular performance.
I think clearly the more time we spend in this, the more time other people spend in this, then we'll be learning more about what you want in VR, and then we'll be able to add the things we need to stay in VR more and to really stay in the middle of the experience and build things in the middle of the experience. One of the beauties of VR is that we don't really know what we're doing, and that means that we don't have to and shouldn't automatically assume that you need X, Y, and Z. We need to start with the first couple of things that we know we need, work with them a little bit, and then from there decide what else to do. This will avoid the danger of just replicating existing pipelines, workflows, and software approaches in a new medium, and then realizing halfway through that half of the stuff doesn't really work.
So in terms of animation stacking, we talked a little bit about it in the live demo. It's really just so that you can create a actual sense of performance, right? Because acting is not about sequential actions that play out in a linear trajectory. It's about creating variation in the timing of those poses that convey an emotional feeling from a character. So again, because we can actually pose characters in real time, pretty much if you have an idea for something that you want to do, you can just pop in, create a few poses, start applying delays to kind of get the sense of timing that you want for the character to again act as a basic guide for then going in to create a more refined performance. So, we could use this as, say, a very rough template to show a mocap artist to be like, this is what we're looking for with this performance. This is roughly your time cues. We already know that feels pretty good when we're experiencing it in VR for this particular moment. So it's at least a good starting point as opposed to just saying, okay, let's go ahead and shoot 15 or 20 different takes because we're really not sure what we want at this point. So just to, again, be able to get that rough sense of timing in early, at least for me as an animator, really helps know that I'm not going to waste a bunch of time trying to hit very specific notes from a director in terms of the final performance. And that segues pretty nicely into the post-creation stuff. Unfortunately, I didn't get to do much to show you guys, but this is just a little bit of a hyperlapse to show that I would say the poses aren't as accurate as you're going to get in Maya. I could do much more refined work there, but these give you the idea, the overall sense very quickly and intuitively. It's through stacking up these different ideas that a lot more quickly we can arrive at something that feels good for a particular moment. And as an animator, I got to tell you, it's pretty neat to have a character right in front of you and just be able to reach out and grab them and start posing them. It's kind of like when I was a kid and was really amped about animation. I don't think I ever thought that this would be possible in my lifetime, so I find it pretty neat. There isn't any cheating in VR. Poses have to work because we can't tell our audience not to look around. In film, we tend to cheat a lot relative to the camera because we know very specifically it's designed for that purpose and the camera's not going to move without us knowing. Now that our audience can decide to wander, we have to be a little bit more diligent about making sure our poses are completely physically correct in 3D space, and having the ability to kind of turn the model around, take a look at it from all different angles really, really helps with that.
And the thing here that I'm excited about more than anything is about systems like this remove the computer as the barrier. Like anybody can come in and create a pose. And I'm a bad animator. My poses will look terrible. And in case you were wondering, they're terrible. And that's but I can practice and make them better. Like there's nothing stopping me from practicing and making better and getting a better eye. We have a lot of, there's that barrier to learning the software that keeps a lot of people from even trying, or they try and they get so far and then they stop. Here we have the opportunity to just open it up to everybody. So anybody can create a pose. And now you've already been able to create animation. And whether it's good or bad animation only relies on how much work you're going to put into it and just the ideas that you have in your imagination. This is the thing. These are things that are going to be really crucial for getting VR into the past where we are into the further into the innovation space, and to make it accessible to more people, so more people can be building high quality VR content.
And then we've already touched a little bit on composition exploration, but again, to have the ability to just grab pieces, it's literally like you're a kid again, where you have your G.I. Joes, you've made a house out of a cardboard box and you're coming up with a story that makes sense to you and is a lot of fun, like that's exactly what we're doing now. It's just we're a little bit bigger as kids. And to literally just reach around, grab the set, play with it, reorient it. I can explore, 10 or 15 different compositions in the course of a half an hour. Whereas I've never had that ability in the past in terms of doing layout and trying to find those ways. And to be able to actually build a set and then quickly move around it to see, okay, well, what if our audience decides to go over here? Like, is our lighting going to create a really bad silhouette for our character if that's the case? If that's the issue, then we might want to reconsider our lighting setup for the scene. So again, it's just about really quickly and really easily exploring all that stuff as much as possible in advance so you can troubleshoot and identify potential problems before you start dropping in a ton of time to go create your final animation assets. For the most part is what I'm most concerned with.
And just getting better ideas. Because I know early on, like we talked about the room layout a lot, and being able to just try out different ideas and run it by the director and say, we think this is going to work better for these reasons. And then the director can actually be inside and see the characters around and say, and then give a yay or nay. That is way more powerful than having the discussion in the abstract when nobody can really wrap their brain around it. And when I say I want the room 10% smaller, you're imagining 15%. Because that's how our brains work, and we just need to be able to see things. Being able to go into have a film director come in, go into a set, or a game director, and be actually be there is far better than any number of design documents and concept art. Important as those are, it just doesn't replace actually being there. And then the director can just quickly tweak things around and say, actually, I was thinking of this. And then we can actually look at that rather than, again, going into that endless set of discussions.
Yeah, in an ideal world, teachers, kids can pick up this stuff and do it just as easily as somebody who's got 5 years experience learning Maya and a couple years experience learning any of the major game engines.
So one thing we believe in deeply is eating our own dog food. If we're going to be building something cool as a technology company, we need to make sure we're using it ourselves in significant ways in order to prove the technology to ourselves, find problems ourselves, and then show it to others. So we, for interactive characters, Gary the Gull, we worked with Mark Walsh to build a 4-minute interactive VR short film, which had multiple options for different questions. And for this, we also built an interactive VR experience. This one is called Reaping Rewards. We announced it at AMD's press conference this morning. And it's an interactive VR experience exploring emotional choices. You are an apprentice Grim Reaper on the first day of your training with your mentor. And you get to play that role and then make emotional choices. And the thing that's interesting about this is that the choices that the character in the experience are making are also things that it connects to the choices you're making as the player, giving you a chance to have a couple of ways to interpret the story. So this was directed by an outside director, as is how we like to work in our company. The director of this is Matthew Ward, who is the cinematics director at Bungie on Destiny. He has he's worked in film for a long time, from Star Wars all the way through The Matrix. And we're going to show you a short trailer.
All that you know will be taken someday by the angel of death or the servants of change.
So that might have looked familiar from John's earlier demo. Yeah, so this is, and Reaping Rewards is going to be releasing we'll be having a 6-minute sneak peek releasing in March on Oculus, Vive, and PSVR, and the full 10-minute experience is going to be releasing in April. So one of the things that, just looking at how that experience went, we found that we were super fast. We were able to build Reaping Rewards with a really small team in just a few months, which is far faster than we typically see. Really easy to learn, easy for folks to get in and start building stuff right away. And then, like we talked about earlier, that reduced barrier to entry was really, really important. Some other thoughts on postmortem. I'm going to talk about a couple things. John can chime in on a few. Even with all of this, we still didn't prototype enough. Old habits, hard to break. We're going to try to get better. We did. It's still tempting to kind of go to that final animation and that final polish of the experience too quickly. We need to restrain ourselves. We need to stay and try out new ideas. We need to say, even if an idea is working, we need to try a few more options. The ending of the piece is something that we went back and forth a lot with the director, and we've blocked out like 3 or 4 different things, and we probably should have done more like 8 or 10, just to even ideas we didn't think would be good, just to get them out there. Having a tight production cycle and a really small team was really good because it forced us to focus, it forced us to move fast and work on the things that were important. It usually takes a long time to build these interactive VR experiences, the narrative content, but this was, but we wanted to go faster. It's better if they go faster, and then you can choose how much time you want to tweak and fiddle with stuff. Prototyping definitely reduced a lot of wasted polish. We didn't go and polish a lot of those ending scenes all the way to the end to realize, oh crap, that didn't really work. And it gave us a lot of good ideas for more interactivity. Building interactivity deeply into the content creation process is really important to us, and different types of interactivity are important. With Gary the Gull was about head-up interactivity. It's the voice, head gestures. There were hand gestures too, but not that much. Here it's more about head down. It's really focusing on hand gestures and interactivity with motion controllers, so that we have that whole package available, and then we can start iterating with developers and other folks in the VR community to figure out what's the next stage the technology and the experience need to go. And then what would you add, John?
Yeah, it was interesting to try and, a lot of what we convey when we speak is not actually coming from what we're saying. 80% of communication is actually nonverbal. So it was an interesting challenge to try and do all this stuff through pantomime. That was a lot of fun. I will say, on the old habits die hard, the games community is much stronger at the idea of just, iterate as fast as possible. Don't lag on ideas. Whereas in the film industry, it's more, you kind of get 1 or 2 shots at it, and if you're not hitting what you need at that point, that's viewed as a mistake, as opposed to we're learning very much so that, no, it's actually about trying to make sure that even if you feel you've got something working, you've got to get in front of an audience / users to start seeing what they do with what you've set up, because we didn't go in thinking we knew what we were doing necessarily. We had a good plan, but what users did with the early experience was definitely stuff that we weren't expecting, right? And that's one of the interesting challenges that I find with VR development is you have a much different subset to your audience. You're gonna have people who just wanna actually consume the story. They're not gonna see if they can look inside the head of the patient to see if they have textures on the back of their eyeballs. But you have a lot of people who are still gonna do that sort of thing, and they're actually gonna be more focused on just, can I grab this thing and throw it? So there's actually a distracted component that VR is, I think, creating in the early group of adopters who just really wanna see how interactive that world is. So that was one of, I think, the interesting things that we ran up against, was just the idea of how do you keep an audience really just focused on a narrative that you're trying to have them experience and make them realize that at a certain point their agency is going to dictate how that experience plays out. And I don't think we would necessarily have a great answer to that question right now, but it's been fun to try and figure out.
And you just got to prototype more and show other people earlier. It's really tempting to hold back until things are at least partway polished before doing it, but you just got to get it out there. You just use distributed VR testing, do something and get folks who don't know anything about the project or you and have no emotional connection to you, get them to look at it, get it out rough. Because if you're showing it when it's already polished, you're showing too late. That's really important, and that's something that we try to keep saying over and over again. So we have a lot of future work that we're excited about. We're going to do a lot of things to let you spend more time actually building in VR, adding more interactivity in VR, a lot of interactive characters in VR, because we've seen that actually doing that inside of VR is incredibly crucial. In sharing, we're already storing content and sharing on the cloud. We need to do a lot more in that area. We'll be integrating with game engines in a more fundamental way in the future. And then there's some, among other things, then doing full character creation inside of VR is something that we're very, very excited about, and we're seeing a lot of interest. So thanks to a bunch of the folks on the team, and we will take some time for questions. And we'll hang out for a few minutes afterwards if you have questions. We'll be running demos of the creative environment in the back of the room. But if there's questions, that'd be great. If not, then that's fine too. Hi.
Hey, so one of the things that just jumped to mind and was really interested in is seeing this, whether it would also be a great prototyping tool for more traditional flat screen animation as well, in terms of being able to be in the space, have a camera and work a camera to then get your different views on and try out different framing techniques. Is that something that you've played around with, or?
Yeah, we have a number of big studios using our platform, and definitely film, like traditional film, is definitely an interest, a strong interest as well. There's definitely a very strong market for using VR to create flat screen content, and we're just seeing that start to take off, and I see a very bright future for that. Absolutely.
Yeah, because you're right, like having your head be the camera, you're like the dolly, right? Like you're able to just kind of create your own cool cinematic moments.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
But then also in terms of actually being able to have a camera setup that you can sort of play
totally.
with. And, yeah.
Having both those systems, like, in a world we could also actually track the motion of your head, bake that out to a camera animation, and then allow you to edit that camera animation, potentially add different lenses to the cameras themselves so you can actually get the proper sense of what the camera should be seen as opposed to just the 2D view. So yeah, there's a lot of exciting stuff that can be done in that space for sure.
Cool, thanks very much.
Hey, that's super cool. I was, while I was watching it, I was wondering if you'd played with the idea of actually directly puppeting the characters with your actual body. Like, I could see it wouldn't work with the crab necessarily, but maybe with the Reaper.
Yeah, that is on our roadmap. We built the fully scalable system first, so that you can use in any type of character, and then adding additional layers of things like that is definitely something on our roadmap.
Awesome.
Especially as tracking devices become more popular and easier to get. Vive trackers are now available as standalone things, so now I can stick them onto my knees, and now I have something that's actually kind of sort of a VR based mocap system. That opens things up quite a bit. So there's a lot of, there's definitely, and then probably stuff that's connected to that, but not directly about mocap. Like, I don't know what that is, but there's probably something there, and I think that's gonna be super cool.
Yeah, even just the posing or something, maybe.
Another one that's really exciting is the accessibility of a microphone, right? Like right on your HMD. There's no reason you can't also be recording scratch dialogue at the time that you are creating that performance, so that again, you can do more than just layout motion. You can actually be building out full scenes with rough choreography, rough camera moves.
Yeah.
So
that could be quite interesting if you take it out to the mocap and give it, like, if you're going to actual mocap a performer or something in that space, to have kind of like a block in or something.
Totally, yeah.
Or, I mean, even maybe
follow this guy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
awesome.
Exciting stuff, yeah.
Cool.
Hi, I was just wondering, can you expand a little bit on how the character presence is different in VR versus 3D TV, I mean, technically?
Because it feels like you're right next to me in a way that 3D TV doesn't. 3D TV feels like the characters on the flat screen have depth and dimension, but they never feel like they're right next to you. I've never been freaked out and fallen down because a character in 3D TV was too scary. But that happened to John. Like he was saying, the Reaper was too close. I'm like, ah, freaked me out.
Technically, I tripped over something in my living room, but
my story is better. So we'll go with that.
So it's like immersion?
It's about creating, it's immersion, it's about creating those characters to make them feel real and threatening. It's about having them react in believable ways. You know, like they track your gaze. Like that's a lot of folks do that, and that's great. It's also about putting your hand in their face and having them react. But it's about having them behave differently based on how close you are to them, and notice when you're not paying attention, and then do the right things. All of that creates something that feels real in a way that 3D TV doesn't. 3D TV is about taking that flat screen experience and giving it volume. But still, it's the same flat screen experience. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, that's cool, but it's not the same as VR.
So with film, you have different shots that the director gives the viewer to specifically tell them where to look and where the attention should be at the moment. So with film, you go from scene A to B to C, and not the transition between. But when you're with VR or a game in this circumstance, the transition, the player goes through them. So how do you get the player to focus on what you want them to focus and actually go through the process of getting from point A to B and experience that transition, as opposed to film that's just making you go to that transition?
The short answer, my short answer to that, and John probably has his own, is do what real life does. Like right now, you don't have to look at me. Like none of you have to look at me. You can look at anything you want. But there are a lot of things here that are cueing you here. It's the podium, it's the screen, it's me talking, it's the lights. You know, take cues from real life. Like why would you pay attention to something like this in real life? You know, is it the audio? Is it because there's something pointing you to it? We have some, like, you know, and then take that and add in all the cues we know from game design, because game design has been doing this for, you know, what, 2 decades. I forget when Doom came out. It's about 30 years ago. Like they've been doing it a long time, and like you can look anywhere you want, but yet there's a lot of cues there. So take the two, combine them together, and I think there's a lot. That's the general answer, and then there's a lot of subtlety to that honestly we're all still learning. So, and what would you add, John?
Yeah, I would just say that the simple answer is not one that works super well, but it at least is a stopgap until people really figure that out, which we're going to be trying to do as well. And that's just, if you decide to look away, let's try and make sure that there's something over there that might engage you a little bit, but not want to keep you there. And let's make sure that the character seems aware enough to at least not progress through the story to a point that you're going to miss a key piece of information, and therefore the story falls apart. But to have a character that just sits there and waits for you to look back at it, doesn't really feel real, right? That feels very choreographed. So then it becomes a much more invasive system where if you start to ignore a character, they engage with you. They try and bring you back, not just through subtle cues of like, we can obviously direct an audience's eye through gesture. That's a big thing about animation, through audio cues as well, through lighting. There are all those things, but if somebody's just determined not to play along, at a certain point, you can't design for that. So it's finding that sweet spot.
And you might actively push against it too. Like you might actually say, you're not paying attention, so fictionally in the story, I'm going to do something to that is in character. You know, like one example of this is Gary the Gull, where with Gary the Gull, you don't have to respond. And he's a used car salesman, that's his general character. He's there to steal your lunch. And if you're responding, he doesn't care about your answers. When he asks you if you like abstract art, he literally doesn't care if you say yes or no. He is only saying it to engage you, to try to, you know, run his con game. And so if you don't respond, he's still going to go along. He's not just going to wait there. Part of his character is to say, well, if you're not saying, well, I'm going to move to my next thing and try to engage you that way. So you use story, use fiction to do that, and think about what would these characters do in real life, how would they respond, and then build your experience out from there.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Maybe one more, maybe we have time for one more question? And if not, we'll grab us afterwards.
It's me again. So I was curious, when you're animating for this, you know, I see you can block out stuff and then you go into Maya and refine it and things. What type of challenges are presented when the player can like move away from where you want them to be? And do you actually have to adapt for something like this, or are you really focused on the player kind of being where you expect them?
We're definitely trying to add like an additive layer system whereby we can figure out, okay, how much from our root up through our neck and head can we allow the system to automatically solve to correct gaze, right? And to a certain extent, that works in certain situations. I would say that in reaping, we actually didn't find that it was all that necessary, because a lot of times he's essentially saying, this is a choice that you have to make. I'm not gonna really engage you beyond telling you that you can either do it or not. So that is definitely something that we're concerned with moving forward, with characters who are a little more present in the scenario.
And part of this goes into room scale versus non-room scale, and we're treating everyone, this isn't necessarily the right approach, but for us, we're treating room scale as an additive thing. So like we build something that's gonna work on all the platforms, and then room scale is an additive thing we put later. And we haven't fully figured out, we haven't actually done the planning for what the room scale thing is. And in the interim, if you move outside of that small volume, we'll just fade to black. And so it's a clear signal that that people kind of respond to instinctively, and they don't kind of move through those. They kind of stay in one spot. I think we have to go, but thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate your time, and thank you.